Hello and welcome to Disc Golf Daily on the weekends. I'm your host, Seth Fendley, and bringing you your first edition of Disc Golf Daily on the weekend. Working title. We'll see if it sticks. And so when we first conceptualized Disc Golf Daily, one of the reasons why I came on board is because I was very interested in telling the history of the Disc Golf Pro Tour and finding an outlet at which I could do that. And Disc Golf Daily seems to be the perfect spot for it, as it was created and conceptualized by Steve Dodge, the founder of the Disc Golf Pro Tour. What better place for us to begin to tell the history of the tour than through a podcast where we're already reaching a large number of disc golf enthusiasts. So over the next few weekends, hopefully for years to come, we'll begin telling the history of the Disc Golf Pro Tour and also showing people how the Disc Golf Pro Tour is today. And so getting us caught up to speed eventually with the ongoings of the Pro Tour and really sort of evolving the podcast as the sport continues to evolve itself. So with that being said, this is season 0. We're starting this podcast from the beginning. We're starting with the first ideas and initial concepts of the tour. And so in season 0, we'll be covering everything that led up to the first season, which started in 2016. And with that, this week, we kick off with an interview with Steve Dodge, the founder of the Pro Tour. Due to the length of this podcast, we decided to cut it into 2 sections. So when we get to the end of this week's podcast, it might end a little abruptly. You'll have an outro from me, but you'll have something to look forward to in the week to come. And so thank you for checking us out. Thank you for being here. We hope that you enjoyed this first edition and look forward to many more editions to come as we begin to tell the history of the Disc Golf Pro Tour here at Disc Golf Daily. Today we have Steve Dodge, the founder of the Pro Tour, on, and to start all of these interviews, the question that I want to ask everybody is to just really tell us how you got into disc golf and that journey to where we are today.
It depends how short of an answer you want. I want to give a longer answer because we only have a small amount of time. I'm trying to run out the clock. But I got into disc golf because I played soccer in high school. And in high school soccer, in most sports, the goal is to win. And in my soul, I didn't understand that actually didn't quite connect with me. And I remember a play in we were playing soccer, and me and Tim were fullbacks, and the ball was kicked over our heads. And one of their players got to the ball and was probably 5 or 10 yards ahead of us. And we made chase. And Tim, the other fullback, literally dove and grabbed the guy's ankle before he got to the box and tripped him. And he got a yellow card for that. And the other team got a free kick. But we got to set up our defense, and they didn't score. And everybody loved Tim for what he did. I understand the goal is to win, but I didn't like the idea of breaking the rules to give yourself an advantage. And so I recognize now that at that moment, soccer kind of lost me. Although I do still love watching soccer, but I recognize that they're playing a different game than I want them to play. In college, I was introduced to disc golf, and then a few years later, ultimate. And the group of people that introduced this sport to me, or Kevin Tiernan specifically, but he introduced it to my roommate and I, Jay Bowler, and it felt right from the start. They were hippies to the core. They were all about being accepting, giving, unconditional love, competing with somebody instead of against somebody. And in ultimate, obviously you call fouls on yourself. And that struck a chord in my soul. So that's, the short answer is I was taught disc golf in college. A cool guy invited me to go play, and I did, and I was okay at it. So I said, I'll stick with it. The longer answer is, I play disc golf because it speaks to my soul.
So you mentioned actually like starting with disc golf first and then learning about ultimate. For people who don't know, you actually were in the ultimate scene for a little while. Could you walk us through sort of your background with ultimate before sort of going all in on disc golf?
Yeah, I'll start by saying I played disc golf probably 87 until maybe 90. And I don't know exactly, but I loved competing at disc golf. And I went to, well, I think it was my first or second amateur tournament in Pittsburgh. I won the tournament, and they told me that I needed to move up to pro. And the whole idea of playing for money went against who I was as a person. And so I decided it'd be better off just to not play. So I stopped playing competitive disc golf. I played Virginia States once a year, but other than that, I really stopped competing. I definitely stopped competing in the PDGA because I just didn't like the idea of being forced to go pro. And in retrospect, I think that was incorrect information, but it's what I thought was correct. Um, and so about the same time, I was introduced to Ultimate, and there is no Pro Ultimate at the time, so that was super great. Um, and I played Ultimate at a very low. Our team was very bad, but on our team there was a core group of us, like 4 or 5 of us, that were pretty good. We actually got a couple of us got recruited to join a regional team that was sort of an all-star team, and we went to Masters Club Championships for a few years. The first year we went, we were 0-6, and I think I played a total of 5 points. So just to give you an idea of my personal skill levels. But anyway, so Ultimate just sang to me. It was exactly it's my favorite sport. If I could play any sport, that's the sport I'd want to play. But by the time I got to be about 35, my knees didn't have it anymore. I could play the first day, but then the second day I couldn't really walk. And so I went back to disc golf, probably around 2000, probably around 2000.
So, in going back to disc golf, there was a time, obviously, as a competitor, but then you transitioned into running events, and I believe also establishing a course. So, could you walk us through, give us a little insight into, like, sort of, I guess, the evolution of getting from, getting from competitor to tournament runner to course designer, sort of thing.
So I'm probably going to contradict the story that I just gave, um, but that's okay. Nobody really listens. Um, but I've always liked to organize events. I've always liked to create things that I personally would like to do. Um, and if you look in the back here, I know we're not going to show a video. Well, we might, but the yellow, blue, and red discs are the first 3 tournaments that I ever ran. And it was called Survivor Pool Ball Golf Disc Golf Tournament, or Pool Ball Survival Tournament, something like that. You played one round, and then the top 19 people made the second round, and this is called survival golf. And then the 19 people in the second round all start on the first hole. Whoever does the worst gets eliminated, and by the last hole, there's just 2 people left. And then in between rounds, we would race pool balls down the hill. So that's where pool ball survival golf came. And the idea was to have I wanted to do a complete set of 15 tournaments. And so we started with the yellow, and then the blue, and then the red. But then I stopped. I don't exactly remember. Maybe I stopped playing disc golf, and maybe I started playing ultimate more, whatever it was. And so from the very beginning, I've always loved running tournaments. Even playing ultimate, we loved hosting tournaments. And then in disc golf, in 03, I moved up to Maple Hill with the intent of creating one of the premier tournaments in disc golf. And that's what my cousin Jason and I had. He had a bunch of clout in the area with all the locals, and so he was able to. We were a very good team and worked together to create the Marshall Street Disc Golf Championship, and that ran from 2004 to 2007 and became became one of the premier events pretty quickly.
And so, as you got into running these premier events, it seems like at some point in time there was an idea of like, what if this was similar across the country, or even made into a series? And so, in that sort of evolution of the thought process, where did that thought come from, and what sort of steps did you start taking early on to see if that could become reality?
From the very beginning. That's a very good question because I might not have gone there. But from the very beginning, the idea was to have a course, a store, and a tournament, and have them all work in synergy. They all improve each other. Where the store would be able to buy at the time, you could only buy certain discs if you were buying a fundraiser for a tournament. And so our store used those fundraiser discs to raise money for the tournament. And then the tournament brought in players from all over the world, and we made DVDs of the tournament. And then people saw those and then came and wanted to play the course. So, and it all kind of worked together. And then the thought was, if we could do this, make it work, and then show other people, hey, this works, then if we could get eight or nine or 10 other people around the country to do it, we could link them up and make a little tour of events. I think 2003 was actually the first year of the PDGA National Tour. So that was just coming on board from the PDGA side. And then I basically came up with the idea of the National Tour basically about the same time, although we didn't have anybody else in it besides our event, which wasn't really a tour.
And so, as you start to see that happening at the PDGA, there became a time where you ended up actually on the PDGA board, and started to push for a little bit more. And so, what was that sort of time frame, and what did that process look like?
I was on the board from 2006 to 2008. The MSDGC had its legs under it. I think it might have been on the national tour in 2006. And when I looked at what the tour was doing, I felt like it could do a better job. Specifically, you have to figure out what's the goal of the national tour. And the PDJ had put some money into a media company to try to get people to come and watch, or to get disc golf seen by more people. So the goal, in my opinion, was to get spectators and media to come see the events. And the way, in my opinion, the way you do that is you have the best players at the events, and I would argue only the best players, and you make sure that there's a media company covering it, and you have MPO and FPO only. And those were the four big things that I focused on during my tenure on the PDJ board. And regarding getting the best players there, in order to do that, you need to have something that makes sense geographically. The national tour was beholden to the events and would hop back and forth because the events would say, I can't do it that weekend. And that, these events just sort of developed. And then, it just so happens that one event's on the West Coast in April and the event on the East Coast is in May. And so you're just popping back and forth. And that didn't make any sense to me. Especially if we want players to tour. And so I went on the board and I said, hey, let's make these changes to the national tour. Let's get more money, more media, MPO, FPO only, make it geographically sensible. And those were all not accepted at all. And that's how that went for a couple of years. And I realized that me serving on the PDGA board wasn't doing anybody any good. I pretty much lost every vote 5-2. Me and Pat would vote yes, and everybody else would just say, no, that's not what we want to do. And at the time, I can totally understand where they were coming from, because this is just a new concept. And then in 2008 and 2010, I'm sorry. In 2010, Jay Redding and I were asked to serve on the national tour committee to come up with ways to improve the PDGA National Tour. And basically we ended up coming up with those 4 things that I mentioned before, and everybody on the committee signed off. I think it was unanimous, and we proposed that to the board, and the board said no, thank you. And at that point, I don't know what I was thinking at that point. I just felt like it wasn't going where it needed to go. I was working for Vibram Disc Golf at the time, and in 2011, I got a divorce. And my ex-wife and daughters moved to Virginia. I live up in Massachusetts. Every other weekend, actually still, I travel down to Virginia to go see my daughters for a long weekend. Instead of seeing them every weekend, I see them every other weekend, but I see them for longer. So I actually did the math, and it works out. I see them actually a little bit more than I would if I only saw them on weekends. But it's a lot of driving. And I asked Vibram if I could work at part-time in Massachusetts and part-time in Virginia to split my time. And they said no. And 3 months later, I asked again, and they said no. And obviously I had all these points that, I had a plan and all that jazz, but the short answer was no. And so at that point, I said, this is probably 2012, and I said I needed to figure out a way so that I could go down to Virginia and spend time with the girls. And the thing that I came up with was the Disc Golf Pro Tour. I thought if I could come up with the Disc Golf Pro Tour, I could work from anywhere. If the events were every other week, then I could spend the off weeks in Virginia with the girls. And it's kind of funny. If you look at those first few years, that's kind of what happened, is the events were every other weekend. And then I was down in Virginia with my daughters on the off weekends. And ironically, I was actually Airbnb-ing out my house to pay for my house. So that's how basically I didn't live in Massachusetts for 3 or 4 years during the tour, which was really tough on my girlfriend at the time, because I'm either on tour or I'm in Virginia, and I've spent very little time in Massachusetts. So God bless her for putting up with me as long as she did. So that's, I don't even remember the question, but that's basically the evolution of how I got from running an event to coming up with the idea of the Pro Tour.
Yeah, so one of the things that you touched on both during your board time and your time on the National Tour Committee was that these 4 core concepts seem to not really take hold with the PDGA. And so some of them I think make sense. The media thing, I think we could talk about all day long about the cost and the effectiveness of that. So we'll sort of table that. But the 2 that really stand out to me are the pros, the top pros, and the geographical nature of things. And so what were, I guess, the hang-ups that maybe kept them from proceeding with even like part of the 4 tenets that you had proposed?
So just attacking the idea of the pros first, I thought it was important to do MPO only and FPO only. At the time, there were some really good players that were 40 and 41. And those players would play an MP40. And in my opinion, if I'm going to go watch a tournament, I want all the best players to play together. And so, in my opinion, I would eliminate MP40. And in fact, that's what we did at the Vibram Open, probably starting in 2008, 2009. I eliminated MP40. I kept MP50. If you're 50 and up, God bless you. You're awesome for playing. And the chances of you competing with someone 20, 25, 30 are very slim. Johnny McRae, there are a few examples of people that can do it, but very few. So I felt it was critical to get rid of MP40 at least, just so that everybody could play together, all the best players. But MP40, those are people that have been playing 15, 20 years. They have a lot of friends. They like the system the way it is. They didn't see my vision. And so, that's a hard ask tell your friend he can't play there anymore. I'd rather not do that. So that's, I feel like that was the primary pushback on that. And then regarding geography, as I said earlier, the events were, no, the PDGA was beholden to the events. The power play was backwards. And I was comfortable telling an event that if you didn't move to a time that makes more sense geographically so that we can make a tour that's basically one loop around the United States, then we'll just not have you as a national tour. There's other events that will do that. But again, saying that to people who have run an event for the last 30 years and then say, hey, if you don't move, you're not going to be considered special. That's hard to do. Maybe I didn't have any friends, so I didn't know. I didn't know, how much I'd be hurting people by doing that. I tend to look at the long picture, and I'm willing to wreck things a little bit to give them a better foundation in the future.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The person who introduced me to disc golf was Ted Smothers, the first commissioner of the PDGA, and he has this great story of one of the first things he did. The first thing he did was in a car ride back from Rochester Worlds, where he was given this duty. He started handwriting the PDGA rulebook because it didn't exist. But the second story that he has is how he pulled out a map, put it up on his office wall, and back in the day, this was before the NT, before the Super Tour, before we had really a lot of professional events, and he just started calling tournaments and saying, "Hey, we had 3 tournaments that had more than $1,000 in the purse, which at the time was a big deal, and they were all on the same weekend." He said, "Hey, you guys, if we coordinate, you could get more players, you could probably raise more money." And he just started putting pins in the map, and he really did. And it was a story for me that stood out as he told it, and I learned it, that sort of resonated as I stepped into the Pro Tour, because it was like, we're 20 years removed, but here we are actually actualizing an idea that started with the first PDGA commissioner but didn't carry through those years. So you're in in the 2006 2008 era. You've made this proposal. How many PDGA members did we have at the time?
I think it was, I don't know exactly, but I would guess on the order of 10,000, maybe 5,000.
I wouldn't know active numbers, but I think as far as historical numbers, it was a little bit on that higher end. But yeah, so just for reference, right?
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
talking about
Historical, I would guess there was something on the order of 40 or 50,000 total.
Yeah.
And maybe we had 20,000 active. I don't know exactly. I'm not the right person to ask that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but just to give us some context of how the sport has grown, right? When we're making that ask, this is a very small number of people, and then we get to the 2012 or 2012, the time that you're on the committee.
And taking to 2010,
yeah, we've gained another 20,000 or so, and then you start to try to figure out, right? How do I not have to be at Vibram? What can I do? What does this Pro Tour thing look like? And so you're talking 2011, 2012. The Pro Tour's first year is 2016. So what is happening in those 4 years as you sort of get it to realization?
So 2012, I'm going to say 2012, the idea was born. 2013, I had created what I would call a business plan and a lot of spreadsheets that said, if we can get like $10,000 from 6 manufacturers, and we can get, we get $250,000 startup money, and how much is it going to cost to move all of like a truck and trailer from here to there, trying to literally imagine every cost. And then trying to see, is that something that I can do? Is that something, how many people would I need? How would we do that without paying anybody any money? Because if you're paying people money, you need more income. And so 2013 was my first iteration of how can this work? And I proposed, I actually went to this should be in the board meeting somewhere. I actually went to the board and I proposed this idea of a disc golf pro tour. And I asked the PDGA to, I think I asked for $80,000. And I said, if you put in 80, I'll put in 80, and you guys can have partial ownership of this, and we will create it, and it'll happen. And it was important to me that the PDGA be involved. They're the governing body. I mean, that just makes sense. And they were actually supportive of the concept and said it wasn't fully baked, and they were right. And so I went back to the drawing board and modified a lot of the stuff, probably not the core stuff, but a lot of the financial stuff, and maybe tweak the media a little bit. I don't know all the different nuances of the change. And then I went back again in 2014 and asked again. And in 2014, they said, they tasked Brian Graham, the executive director at the time, to work with me and develop exactly what the proposal would look like. And so we did that. And from my perspective, it felt like Brian Graham was slow walking the process. Instead of responding in a day, respond in a week or two. Obviously, he's busy, and potentially I'm not somebody who's going to follow through on something like it. No, I was an unknown entity. Well, that's not quite true. but anyway, the relationship didn't go as well as I was hoping. And we didn't ever get to the point where Brian and I were happy with what was being created. And I feel like at one point we just said, okay, this is as far as we're going to get. And we took it to the board, and Brian said, here's the proposal. And just so you know, I don't support it. And we'd have to check the meeting minutes, but that's my memory of it. And my memory, from my perspective, my memory is horrendous. So, we really should check that, but I'll say that's my emotional memory. And the board said, okay, we're not going to support this because the executive director doesn't want to do it. And that cost a lot of time and a lot of money, literally in both senses. Anyway, it just cost, and that was just me losing money. And then in 2015, had conversations with Nate Heinold and Jeff Spring, and then obviously me, and the three of us were very comfortable with the idea of the Pro Tour. By my memory, the PDGA had decided that Nate's Ledgestone event, which had been a national tour event the previous year, would not be a national tour event in 2016. And the same thing went with GMC, and this is the PDGA. Their goal was to build tournament directors, and they felt like giving a tournament director or an event a national tour would encourage them to do better, and that logic holds. My goal with the Pro Tour was to create an event and have that event happen every year and have people know, okay, in September, I can go to the MVP Open. I'm just going to guess that everybody in New England knows in September, I can go to the MVP Open. And guess what? In 2025, in September, you can go to the MVP Open. In 2026, and so on. So I was very happy to keep the same events, and the PDGA wanted to change events. And in 2016, they just happened to, in my opinion, change two of the best events out of being national tours. And they were happy to say, hey, let's try this pro tour thing. And so we joined up. Those three events were our foundational events. And then we had the Silver Cup, and we had the Minnesota Majestic. And then we had the finals at Smugs, and it was a 5-event pro tour, and it made geographic sense. It was all basically Northeast and North Mid, whatever you call that, Midwest. And then the finals up in Vermont, and it was geographically sensible. We had high payouts. We had media at every event, live and post. And the tour was going.
And so you talked about connecting with Nate and Jeff. And so how did those connections come about?
I think I don't know exactly how I met Nate Heinold. Maybe he does. I don't, but we were both pretty prominent in the PDGA. We were both national tour directors. So we ran in the same circles. So getting to know Nate would have been very easy. Also, Nate was the guy that was pushing the envelope as far as payout goes. He created we're going to make a ton of discs, and they're all going to be special. We'll raise a ton of money, and I'm going to have the largest payout in the world. So he was someone that was worth paying attention to. Jeff, it's interesting. I was actually telling somebody this story a couple of days ago. The place I met Jeff was actually at the Vibram Open. Smuggler's Notch was looking to build courses and getting into disc golf, and he came to the tournament as a vendor and said, "Hey, come up to Smuggler's Notch. We've got a tournament." And it was I thought it was awesome that he was doing that. I took his $200 and I said, "Yeah, you can tell people about your course and whatever." And he did that for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and they kept growing the number of people that would come. And they did a very good job of going from 0 to a pretty fast speed in a short amount of time. Probably 3 or 4 years, Smuggler's Notch became a significant disc golf destination. And that was Jeff just going and shaking hands and saying hi to people. And that's how I met Jeff. And I was very excited to have, I hate to say it this way, to have GMC not be a national tour event in 2016. If the PDGA had made Ledgestone and GMC national tours, the Pro Tour wouldn't exist.
Yeah. So before I forget, I do want to talk just as a sidebar. I have also found that what GMC and Smuggler's Notch in particular do, as far as going out and promoting their courses, to be one of the most unique things that a disc golf course can do. And so for people who aren't aware, they actually have a budget that allows them to go and set up at certain areas to promote their course, and more importantly, to promote the series of tournaments that they run during the year. And it has been a very effective way for a course that is in the middle of nowhere, Vermont.
Yeah.
It's relatively hard to get to, for them to grow those tournaments and become a destination. And I think that's a really cool just sort of sidebar to have, that like that's how the GMC got to where it is today. And it's something that they still continue to do.
Right.
If you go to the Disc Golf Expo, you'll see Smuggler's Notch set up there. They have been for the past 2 years to do the same thing that they were doing at Vibram back in the day.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to episode 1 of season 0 from the history of the Disc Golf Pro Tour here on Disc Golf Daily. We hope that you enjoyed our part 1 interview with Steve Dodge, the founder of the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and that you're looking forward to part 2 coming to you next weekend. If you did, make sure to share this podcast with a friend. And if you haven't already, make sure to go give us a look on Facebook, Twitter, or any of the other social media platforms where you can find us. And make sure to, yet again, if you haven't already, go tell a friend. We'd love to have them here listening on the podcast. With that, I hope that you enjoy your weekend, get out there and play some disc golf, and we'll catch you again next week.
Thank you so much for watching please like, subscribe, comment, and share. It really does help us grow.